Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today, it is my absolute honor to have Simon Scriver on with us.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in its own. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests, the podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Simon is the co-founder of Fundraising Everywhere, a recovering fundraiser, coach, mentor, trainer, keynote speaker, podcast delighter, and lovable imp. Fundraising magazine named him one of the top 20 most influential fundraisers. He's also won Fundraising Ireland's Small Budget, Big Impact, and Supplier of the Year awards, Eircom's Startup Award, and was a 2019 finalist of Charities Institute Ireland's Communication Agency of the Year. He's a TEDx speaker and has previously won the Toastmasters UK and Ireland International Speech Contest. He holds a diploma in fundraising and a certificate in fundraising and is working towards a degree in theology. Well, welcome, Simon.
Thank you. It's so cringe listening to your own introduction, isn't it?
I'm sure. So many of us kind of fell into fundraising, not really as what we were intending to do when we grow up. So tell me a little bit about your journey as to how you became a fundraising expert.
Yeah, I think falling into fundraising is a good description. I think I've only ever met two fundraisers who wanted to be a fundraiser. Everyone else just kind of stumbles in. And similarly, when it was 20 years ago this year, I was backpacking around the world and I was in Australia and I needed to stop and get any job I could find. And lo and behold, I saw an advert to be a street fundraiser and a street canvasser on the street, stopping people. And I had never known that you could raise money for charity and get paid for it. So that was quite exciting. And in a different country, it was a good chance to chat to a lot of people. So I did it, and it was tough, but I loved it, and I learned a lot, and it opened the door to working in an agency, fundraising agency, and then it just went from there. So I come from a face-to-face background, like a very, on the street face-to-face. Right. But I ended up working in telephone departments and then moved into, I was working for an agency that did every form of fundraising. Really, it was like a one-stop shop. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, it gave me a chance to kind of learn about all different areas of fundraising and how they all kind of tie together.
Right.
And eventually I set up my own agency. I went freelance as a consultant. And then about 5 years ago, I met Nikki and we set up Fundraising Everywhere, which is kind of just taking a lot of what I knew and what Nikki knew and had learned, but really more us stepping aside and realizing that there's a lot of people in the sector who know a lot, or at least a lot of people who know a little bit about lots of things. And so, so a lot of my journey has been a lot of training people and working with people and just connecting people to just make fundraisers better. I'm too tired to fundraise anymore, but I help other people fundraise.
It certainly does take a lot out of you because the good fundraisers have to give like 120%, right? And so after a while, it starts to take its toll on you.
It never ends, does it? As a fundraiser, I mean, there's always something more you can do. There's always, I always found, especially when I was on the ground, it was like, well, you could always have one more conversation, and that could be the person who changes things, and when you're working for a cause that you believe in or causes that you believe in, it can be hard to like put a full stop on the day because it's like, well, I can just do a little bit more. And I think I especially struggled with that. I really struggled to switch off, which is why I think I've had a lot of points in my career where I just really struggled just because to balance things.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in our sector feel that way, and our organizations or the non-profits, God love them, but they'll take as much as you give them.
Yes.
And so as a fundraiser, you get into this relationship where it does never end until you switch off. And so I'm getting better at that, but it's difficult,
One of the things that I always like to do on this podcast is to have my guests kind of share the best canvas or ask that they were ever on, and kind of what made it the best for you. It doesn't necessarily need to mean that they gave you $1 kajillion. There's other things that make it the best canvas.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of nice conversations when I was head of fundraising. I was head of fundraising in the charity, and I had a lot of nice conversations with major donors and businesses and things like that. But to be honest, I always found them not quite as fulfilling as going back again to the days as a street fundraiser. When I started, I still remember a lot of the donors that I signed up. I still remember the first donor I ever signed up and stopped on the street, and those were really the connections that were really special to me. And I guess you're maybe looking for some like great formula for what makes a good ask, what makes a good canvas. But actually, it was just all those little conversations that taught me so much about fundraising, and so much about what I learned was that it was not about me or the charity. It was about figuring out what the donor wanted, asking questions, having that curiosity to explore what was in the donor's mind, and then translate into how you could do that together, how you could achieve that together. And so I remember conversations where, I remember a woman who stopped and on the streets of Melbourne, and there was no way she was going to sign up. She said, "There's absolutely no way, but I'm just going to chat to you." And I remember it was like, well, I don't want to chat about the charity. Let's just chat together. And we just chatted, and through that, it kind of learned so much about her. And I remember so much about her, and because she had an injury, she had fallen off her bike and she had an injury. She was talking about that. She was talking about wanting to volunteer, but that she was so busy with work, and work was going so well. And so you realize that she had this capacity in wanting to give. Or if you just went in and asked for money, she was straight away no, because that's not how she wanted to help. But then as we talked, it realized like she wanted to help in any way she could. She just thought volunteering was the best, but she had no time to volunteer. And so the conversation was very much just about like opening her mind to the idea. It's like, well, until you have that time to volunteer, here's a great way that you can help. So she wasn't a major donor. She wasn't like a huge donor coming in. But, for me, conversations like that were really significant, because it realized, people come into these conversations sometimes suspicious of charity. Sometimes, we like to think we know what we want to do with our money and things like that. And it just made me realize that it's not about the ask so much. It's like so much about that conversation, the lead up, and just getting to know them, building that trust, and just truly understanding what they're trying to achieve. And that's what I loved. I love, and you said it. You missed being in the trenches and connecting with those. And I do miss those conversations. I don't miss the big company proposals, but I miss that one-to-one conversation where it's someone in their day who wants to make the world a better place, but they just don't really know how yet. And lo and behold, you're there.
Yeah, and that kind of interaction is so amazing. I remember one of my earlier gifts, someone gave us, I don't know, $100,000 or $200,000. It wasn't a necessarily huge gift, but they came up to me afterwards and thanked me for the opportunity to support that organization that I was with. And I'm like, oh my goodness, seriously, the donor is thanking me. That just makes you feel like the bee's knees, as they say. It was...
People don't believe it. Like the bee's knees, the dog's pajamas, the cat's pajamas. People don't believe that donors enjoy giving and want to give. I think like bad fundraisers, or maybe people new to fundraising, not necessarily bad. And I think organizations, the staff who don't like or don't understand fundraising, they think the same thing. It's an imposition. Asking for money is always an imposition. And we know, as fundraisers, know that's wrong. We know we have the conversations where people just really want to help. And going back to like some of the street conversations, which are coming back into my memory as we talk about them. And you know, I remember a guy who came up to me and wanted to donate. Like, there was no conversation, and he just lost his job, and he was like, "I've just lost my job. I know it's going to be fine and everything, but I need to do something, you know, to good that shows me it's not just about, you know." It was just like how he was making brightness out of the day was by giving, even though he had just lost his job. And I think that was a real, you know, I do that now. If I feel especially broke, or if I feel like I'm having a really bad time, I'll make a donation, because it makes me, you know, there's just something, because you're still just as broke afterwards, but you've done something really good. And so I think there's that. There's all these different reasons people give that's very fulfilling to them. And it's not an imposition. You know, it can be an imposition if you're asked, or if you ask badly, or if you're, you know, if you're rude or whatever. But again, I do believe fundraising is about like creating opportunities and matching what you're trying to achieve with what they're trying to achieve. And when you approach it like that, that's when you enjoy fundraising. That's when you realize it's not an imposition. It's like something really special that's happening here.
Yeah. No, I think those are some really salient points. And you know, obviously there's the good side of things, but then there's also the flip side of the coin. And we've all been on these canvases or asks where they've just gone totally off the rails, or you go afterwards and you're like, oh my gosh, am I in the right business? Maybe I should be selling used cars or something. So tell me about a time that you had a canvas that just didn't go as hoped.
I think the ones that used to always get me was where you put aside time to meet someone, you know, which I always enjoyed, meeting donors or potential donors, and they would really want to help in a way that just wasn't helpful. And I think that you know, and with all due respect to donors and everything, I think there were a number of conversations where the person had it very clear in their mind that they wanted to do something, and it just really was not a fit, and was not. And one particular example I remember was, I was working for a sexual abuse charity, and I met with this company who essentially, they had a lot of money, you know, they wanted to do stuff. There was almost a connection there. But when it came to the meeting, it was clear they were not going to give any money. I mean, maybe a better fundraiser than me would have converted it into a cash donation. But what they wanted to give was driving lessons to people who were survivors of sexual assault. And for me, there was just no coherence there. It was nothing to do with like what the work we were actually doing there. And it just became quite a frustrating meeting. You know, obviously you're still grateful that people want to help in any way, and you try and make things work. But you hear a lot of those stories, and I remember a good few of those meetings where it was really, you were trying to fit like a square peg into a round hole. And there was almost something frustrating in it, because it was like you wanted to turn around and say like, look, this just isn't going to work. But you know, that's a difficult conversation to have, and I just did not enjoy it.
Yeah, you know, that's a great point. It is a difficult conversation. In a former life, I had a donor who wanted to give us a large sum of money to do Project ABC, which was kind of tangential to what our mission was.
Yeah.
And I said to them, you know what, that's not really what we do. But you know what, I'm going to hook you up with someone who that is what they do. And the donor was actually grateful, wound up giving us a small, modest gift, gave this other charity a larger gift. But I think that at the end of the day, it served the donor's needs much better than serving our, you had to try and ram that square peg into a round hole. Doesn't benefit anybody, because it's not really what the charity does, and it's not really what the donor wants to accomplish. So no one's winning per se in that scenario.
Yeah, and I think in your example, I mean, I think that's a lesson I past me could have learned from you, Jane. Like, that sounds like a much better way to handle, or a much clearer way to handle. Again, if you go in trying to help the donor achieve what they're trying to achieve, whether you're involved or not, you're still going to benefit down the road. You know, there's still that goodwill, and like you said, you end up getting maybe a smaller donation. But again, it's like those connections are made if you're not trying to force someone to do what they want to do, but instead trying to like support, trying to build into what they're trying to do. I think that's really smart.
Yeah. Simon, this has been absolutely amazing. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, the best way to find me is at fundraisingeverywhere.com. So Fundraising Everywhere is our online community for fundraisers. We do a lot of training, a lot of information resources on there for fundraisers. So fundraisingeverywhere.com, I'm always floating around there. But otherwise, LinkedIn is actually my social media of choice now that Twitter or X is starting to fade off. I spend less time on social media now,
amazing.
But if you're going to find me,
thank you so much, Simon, for your time.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.